Hello and welcome back, and this is part 2 in my series of videos where I'm looking at popular multimedia streaming platforms that you can run from your very own NAS server. Now, in part 1 I looked at comparing Plex Media Server with Jellyfin. It was kind of like a David and Goliath situation, with Plex being largely the established go-to premium streaming platform for NAS servers, and Jellyfin being the young upstart that was really trying to shake things up, being all open source. Now, in today's video we're going to be comparing Emby and Jellyfin, and for those of you in the know, this is a very different conversation. Why is that? Well, because Jellyfin is a splinter, a kind of offshoot, a fork from Emby. When Emby was first designed, it was designed to be an open source alternative to the likes of Plex Media Server, and although most of these projects all stem from the same beginnings, it has to be said that when they do deviate in their own ways, it can be very pleasing for everyone in the community. Now, Jellyfin forked off from Emby way back in 2018, even a little bit before that, to be a truly open source alternative, because Emby, as good as it is, started getting a little bit premium. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, it means that although the platform got bigger and better and served itself as an alternative to Plex for quite a while, in order to fund the project, much like Plex did as well at one point, certain features and developments are put behind a premium tier known as Emby Premier. Now, this is when you pay a little bit towards the project and you can actively donate if you choose, or go for the subscription model, and from there you have access to a bunch of features that we'll talk about later on that allow you to create an even better multimedia NAS or private server level experience. And by that I mean, turnkey or off-the-shelf solutions like Synology, QNAP, Acer Store, TerraMaster, as well as DIY or build-it-yourself level servers that you want to utilize with third-party platforms such as TrueNAS Core, TrueNAS Scale, Unraid, and more. Now, where Jellyfin came into this was when this was developed, it was trying to be, and indeed for the most part, and we'll talk about that later, is utterly open source and free. And pretty much everything that's behind either a premium paywall or restricted to a one-off fee on the Emby side of things is free on Jellyfin. And comparing these two platforms isn't just going to be a case of which one's the better media server for your needs, but it's about the user experience as well. And one of the things I will touch on quite heavily later in the video isn't just you, the person that's watching this, that's got your own NAS and setting up your media server. It's going to be about setting up your multimedia server and client later on. Think of all those elderly relatives. Think of all of those friends and family that you're going to need to connect with this server with a, some might say, more limited grasp of IT and networking than yourself. That's going to be very important. But for now, let's compare these two. First and foremost, let's talk about design and the user interface of them. Although you can see here on screen I am accessing this via the web browser, I am running this on two Synology NASes here, but it's worth highlighting that everything you're going to see today is largely possible on any NAS platform. Again, DIY or turnkey. Again, Synology, QNAP, Acer Store, TerraMaster, WD, TrueNAS, builds there, Unraid, and more, to one greater or lesser degree, something I'll touch on later on. Now, although we're accessing the web browser, there are, of course, client applications, which I'll get onto in a moment. But for now, as you can see, because they're forked, because Jellyfin is forked off from Emby, the user interfaces are very, very similar indeed there. Indeed, the level of customization, the placement of logos, even some of the icons transfer over very, very familiarly, because it's all built on open source, of course. It's just a question of what you do with open source afterwards, and you create enough on there to justify charging for it and making it an your own IP. Now, when it comes to configuring the server, configuration between these two platforms is similar, but unlike a previous video when I was talking about Jellyfin's customization with Plex, Jellyfin, I would argue, when you go to their dashboard, although they're very, very similar, Emby still seems to have the tiniest amount more customization overall in terms of configuring the server in a breadcrumb kind of Lego brick style of way. Indeed, when we go into things like transcoding, when the devices are going to be activating some of that hardware transcoding, Transcoding it gives you the best of both worlds on the Emby side. So it gives you the ability to have the nice, easy, yes, I want transcoding, no, I don't want transcoding. And then it gives you the ability to really break down how that transcoding will take place, offline transcoding, active transcoding, whereas on the Jellyfin side, although hardware acceleration and transcoding, if you will, is available there, you have to kind of configure it a little bit more and know a lot more about your hardware. So the Emby side of things manages to give you, basically let you have your cake and eat it, to give you that customization in its hardware configuration with hardware transcoding, but at the same time allow you to do it in either a user-friendly or more complex means. And there's ways to configure a lot of these options to a more advanced and a beginner settings there. But why do I always talk about transcoding in these videos, and why is it important in today's video? That is for later on, or just go to the time bar at the bottom of the screen that will tell you to skip ahead to that point. But when it comes to configuring what you see here, themes and the design of what you're seeing here on screen, as you can see, we can go down, go into the user interface there. You've got the dashboard, you've got the option to change some things that are on the left hand side of the screen. You've got the option to change the display there, how it's displayed on the client server configuration side. But in order to configure how it looks to the end user, that's when we have to make our way over to a client. So we've got here on screen the Windows and we got the Windows client for both Emby and Jellyfin there. Don't worry too much about the zoom. I had to try and squeeze it all here on screen. And again, if we look at the average movie, so if we go into the movie section of both of these and we select a movie, I would say the transitions seem a little smoother there. But again, that is very specific to the Emby tool there. And I think it probably looks a little nice. You can configure a lot of these options. And again, you can change some of that background stuff. There are options you can go into to make it look a little swisher on Jellyfin there. So again, you can change either specific information about individual files and folders, or you can go back into that settings menu there and actually change how some of it's presented to you in terms of when you're cycling through those albums. So again, if we go back into the display there, we can change some of that background stuff there, change, you know, just some of the light stuff there overall within the client. But I'd say between the two of them, the extra money Emby have clearly spent on their UI, it runs through. And again, with this crawling of metadata, they're all crawling the same reference point there. Emby also has the ability to create customized art on there as well. So a little bit of kudos to them on that one. So let's test a couple of files and have a little look at that playback there. We're going to go for the PC desktop, and I'll explain the reason for that later on. But if we carry on, and we'll go ahead and play exactly the same file, let's pause them side by side. So we'll go into there. We're going for the test files first file there. I'm just going to play that file for us here. We'll have them on side by side just to compare the user interface of both of these files. Again, we're not using that copyright content because unfortunately it does make it very difficult to show it to you here on YouTube. Now, again, if we might have to move me out the way here because I think it's going to make things very difficult for you to see these bars. We'll move back later on. So at the left hand side of the screen here, you can see running here on Jellyfish there are options open to us. We can get those stats for nerds on screen, and that gives us a lot more information about the file that we're playing. I might be in the way of that. Again, we got those transcoding options, quite a good degree of transcoding options that we can flick between. We've got the option for adding those subtitles there, and again, we can look online for existing, but we will need to have that plugin in place. And that's really it. We've got the picture-in-picture support as well of both of these, where we can just, if we choose, just have that picture in the corner of our screen that allows us to just sort of browse through and take care of it whenever we want. But again, I'll have to move that there and put that back there on screen. Move the stats for nerds. But on both of them, very similar outlooks of what we're seeing here. And overall, there's not too much difference between them when it comes to the user interface. Again, not a tremendous surprise given the fact that one is a fork of the other. So in terms of the user interface and what we're seeing here, we're not seeing a dissimilar experience, although I would argue it does feel just a little bit slicker there on Emby. Now, whether that's because Emby has been around longer and has a lot more UX design put into it, or that Jellyfin, in order to be a fork, has had to put a little bit more work into forging its own path. Maybe it doesn't quite have the extra tier of design being put into it there long term. But one thing I will say is this is where we're going to make our first big reference to Emby Premiere, because Emby Premiere, as mentioned in the introduction, you're going to have to spend a little bit of money if you want to get the full experience of Emby there when it comes to the user experience, not only in terms of design and configuration, but just generally some of those hardware options. Now, I referred to this in my other video, but I've actually made a huge article here comparing Jellyfin, Plex, and Emby. And although we're only focusing on Jellyfish and Emby for this video, it's definitely worth referring to throughout this video. Again, if you want to learn more about this, it will be linked in the description. Alternatively, this was created with a great deal of support and help and permission from Protector Desura over on GitHub, who's been kind of creating a great body of work on these platforms altogether for you to check out. And this article here, although it talks about what they've all got in common and what they can all run side by side, the real thing here to look at is the things that they don't have in common. So straight away, if we look at Jellyfin and Emby, and again, I'm just going to go back into OBS real quick and move myself back down here to the bottom of the screen. If we have a little look, Jellyfin there, completely free, completely free, completely free. It's utterly free, free, open source, true open source. More on that later. Emby, on the other hand, here again, built off open source, and then it starts costing you money. Now, this money you're paying will depend on the number of devices that you're accessing there, number of servers and clients that you're configuring all under one banner, as well as some of the client tools. And this is where the kicker lies. Because if we go back into that side-by-side there of both platforms, that Adobe Premiere, not only is it the level of features that are supported that you have to pay for, so again, offline downloading, which you can do for free in Jellyfin, pay for. If you're going to use live TV or a DVR plugin, little antenna there, paid for. Apps and add-ons, and again, client apps and add-ons, more on that later on, premium. Hardware transcoding, premium. Adding some of the trailers and extra footage, premium. And you see the point I'm making here? Premium, premium, premium. You have to pay for it. Now, again, it's not hugely expensive. Pay a month, $5. A year, $55, $54, $55. Lifetime, $119. But it's still money that you're paying for a service when you've already paid for the hardware of your NAS. Now, one, you bought a TV, but you still paid for Netflix, right? It makes sense. You know, sometimes you've got to pay for a good platform for it to evolve. I get that. But where people draw the line sometimes is twofold. One, it's when people have to pay to transcode. Now, with transcoding, transcoding is when a file is reshaped on the fly to be better suited to either the client that it's being played on or the hardware environment that it is playing on top of. What does that mean? Well, if we look at the files here that we're listing here on screen, such as those test files, some of these files are better suited. They run on a compression technique known as H.264. Some of them run in something called H.265 or HEVC. Now, because of that, and we can make our way back to that original article, some files need the file to be changed in shape and scale. What that means is that maybe you're playing an enormous 4K file, but you are sitting on a beach on the other side of the world using cellular data, and you just want to watch it on a phone. You don't need Avatar 2 in 4K. What you need is a small compacted version of it. So you need it compressed, but you didn't plan in advance. You want that file changed on the fly. Now, you can use your CPU, your memory, your hardware in general to get the job done on your NAS on the fly. In other words, that it's going to use less than a second of time to compress or reshape less than a second of footage, and therefore be able to do it on the fly. That comes down to software transcoding and hardware transcoding. Software transcoding uses raw system power and is less efficient, but will change those files on the fly. Hardware transcoding is when, if your CPU in your NAS has integrated graphics, or you've got a graphics card in place, it can access these hardware resources to get the job done quicker, with less hardware impact and use less resources overall. You're either doing that because the destination device, you know, a mobile phone, a tablet or whatever, is, you know, better suited to a smaller version of that file, or you're running on a connection, limited cellular internet connection there, or spotty Wi-Fi. You might want a smaller version to get the job done quicker, or you're running a version of that file, be it a file or format, you know, a codec such as some of the audio stuff, which is in FLAC, ACC, MP4A, or you're running compression techniques such as HEVC, which are not supported on your Amazon Fire TV, your home console, your phone, and you need the server to convert it due to a lack of licensing there. In those scenarios, transcoding is invaluable, and hardware transcoding you have to pay for to get on the Emby service there, because it's not available to all users. You have to get that Emby Premier account, whereas on Jellyfin you can use as much system hardware as you want. You have to tweak it a little bit more in the encoder, but you can get the job done without paying another penny more. Another thing, as mentioned, about paying for stuff is to do with those apps. You see where it says free apps? That's a little disingenuous, because they're not all free. Again, we'll head back to that list there, and if we have a little look at the supported apps, there's good news and there's bad news. Because if we look at the list of supported apps between Jellyfin and Emby, the good news is that Emby, as you can see there, there's an app for it, at least on the NAS server side, everywhere. So if you want to run Emby on a NAS, you want to run it on an old PC or a Mac Mini you had knocking around, you want to use an Nvidia Shield, an old Raspberry Pi, running it on a Windows desktop as a server, you can get that and it's available there. Jellyfin is not readily available as a ready to deploy installer for all of those platforms. Sometimes it's not even available on the platforms that they say it is as an installer, and is really a Docker application that you have to manually set up within things like a Docker or a container-based application as a kind of mini hypervisor, but for a single application there. However, when you want your client devices to access your Emby or Jellyfin server, it's a very different conversation, because this is another area where Emby have popped it behind that premium wall. So as you can see, where it says server license or $5, what that means is if you want to enjoy your Emby media server on your mobile phone, you can download the app, but on some platforms you will have to pay $5 to access the app, or you'll have to have the premium service. Otherwise, much like I'll show you now, if you try to play a file on the app and you don't have the Premier service, like so, you will play it, there'll be a slight delay, and it will say to you, you need to get Emby Premier, or enter your account details to get the paid access point via your Premier account there. And this isn't even a case of transcoding. And again, to use transcoding, you'll need the Premier on Emby side. No, this is just to use those apps available to you. So on the one hand, it is supported on a lot of client side, on server side there. But when it comes to the client devices, so again, this could be all of your relatives, your friends, your colleagues who you're allowing access to your Emby server. Some of them are going to need to have your specific account login, or at least you're going to have to create user accounts for them within your group account to give them access fully on their client apps. Or you're going to have to go in and set them up yourself, which can be time consuming. Now, counterpoint, Jellyfin, it doesn't get much better than when we were talking about on the server side, because much like as mentioned, Jellyfin requiring kind of container application setup in some cases to run Jellyfin server side. When it comes to the client side, the range of applications available on all of those different client devices, from Amazon Fire TV and Android TV and Apple TV and your smart TV and your phone, your laptop, whatever, there are in some cases is an app available, but in other cases those applications are little more than web browser tabs with a small GUI on top. And in some cases you have to pay, because that application may be on a platform or service where they have to, and by they I mean Jellyfin, have to pay to have that client app on there accessible to you. You have to pay for hosting. So then they kind of have to push that through, or they're reliant on third-party applications to work through. Either way, both Emby and Jellyfin are not a perfect scenario when it comes to sharing your server with less tech-aware individuals, or less input from yourself in order to get those clients working. Of the two, I would say Emby is probably the easier of the two as a client and server side setup, but I would argue it is one that is largely fraught with additional payments throughout. Now, when it comes to the level of baseline features that both of these media platforms arrive with, they're largely the same. If we dig in, we've already looked at it a little bit before, but if we make our way into the dashboard of both of these, bring them up on screen, the level of configuration and controls you have arguably is better on Emby. Sorry to be repetitious, but it just seemingly is. But the baseline that you have at the beginning isn't just it. You can, of course, include plugins. Both of these platforms allow you to have add-on services that you can bolt on that later bridge with other media applications, other media server and client-side applications and service ones as well. And again, things seemed, because Emby's been around longer, there seems to be more of them. Now, a lot of these either come down to the people that have created these tools, configuring them to be more better suited to individual platforms of each of them. Therefore, it relies on that third party to create a respective Jellyfin or Emby client app to appear on their app centers there. Or it's simply the case that Jellyfin is newer and that's yet to happen, and therefore it's just a question of time. But again, the level of configurable add-ons just seems to be better there on the Emby side of things. Everything from not even just server-side ones to do with multimedia, but standard NAS and integrated server management tools to be built in as well. And the synchronization with cloud platforms, although available on both of them, there seems to be a broader range of tools supported there on Emby because it's just been around that bit longer. You can add third-party repositories to the Jellyfin setup there, but the baseline level of configurable options available to you on day one just seems to be better there on the Emby side of things. And indeed, if we make our way in back to that original kind of comparison tool there we did between Jellyfin, Emby, and of course Plex on there as well, you can see that the range of services included on Jellyfin and Emby are largely the same. But the word we keep coming back to again is license there. So again, Emby, as good as it is, will always have that paid tier there, which Jellyfin doesn't seem to have, and maybe they'll never add a paid tier on there, and overall they'll win the hearts and minds of a lot of people over Emby. But we can't really say that Jellyfin has better or more features than Emby. It's just that the Emby features, although there are more of them, happen to be by a large degree behind that premium wall there. So let's summarize this right now. If we go down to the bottom, sorry to keep arching back to this article, we have already created our comparison there of what's good and what's bad about both of them. So in terms of Jellyfin, sorry to be repetitious once again, but one, largely free client and server side tools there, support of many more formats of media as well, baseline, and in terms of transcoding and more, a wider range of plugins compared with that of Plex, but Emby certainly has more overall. Maybe I should change the wording on that. I will do that after this video. Live TV, we didn't even really touch on that idea of using live TV services and like IPTV as well, using a localized antenna. You have to pay for that on the Emby side and not on the Jellyfin side. And the configuration is a little better on the client side, I would say, but the configuration on the server side is better on Emby. And lastly, offline downloads is something that's for free there on Jellyfin. And when it comes to Emby, of course, with Emby, if you are happy to pay that one-off payment, you have access to everything and a better experience overall. Also, there's phone camera uploads and traditional just pointing backup uploads as a target there for your backups as well. It's more customizable on the server side than both Plex and Jellyfin as well as those additional apps being greater in number than that of Jellyfin overall. And it's more analytical in its approach than Plex Media Server. As I say, when it comes to Emby, you're kind of having your cake and eating it in terms of the range of apps and services. Again, when it comes to limitations of both platforms, we've largely established it there. When it comes to limitations on the side of Emby, it's got to be that most of these great features and services are stuck behind Premiere. And when it comes to the limitations of Jellyfin, it is that it's nowhere near as established in terms of available downloads on NAS platforms, as well as on the client side, with the amount of time that you're going to have to spend helping out friends and relatives installing those those Jellyfin client tools on their devices, or at least bridging their third-party ones as well. So when it comes down to it, Emby is still kind of, for me, the better choice for most casual users between Jellyfin and Emby. I would recommend Emby to users who, you know, are looking for a more customizable platform but aren't really going to be taking advantage of specialized tools. If you're more than happy to pay just a little bit of money to save time, Emby's also going to have you back there as well, because you don't have to go for the premium platform like Plex tells you to, and you can just go ahead and pay single $5 or $5 on a handful of devices for you to unlock those apps, and you're absolutely fine long term. You can always re-download that app. But if you are going to be configuring your media a lot on the fly, a lot of transcoding, if you're going to be using more specialized formats, again, like those audio ones that we mentioned earlier on, for when you're going to be doing audio books still, and you're going to be running real raw media there, these are ones where you're going to need transcoding. Even high dense media that isn't HEVC, and you're thinking you're not going to need to do hardware accelerated transcoding, some of those files have got quite dense audio media that will need transcoding there. Something to bear in mind there. And if you've got a little bit more time to play with, and you're a little bit more tech versed, and you don't mind configuring these devices for all of your friends and family and relatives, Jellyfin will be appealing, as it is, between these two, truly open source in a way that Emby has sort of abandoned the complete open source position that it once had. And between the two of them, I think Jellyfin is only going to get better over time, but Emby is already better now. And again, given its slightly older nature and a little bit more pedigree behind it, I think they've earned that position that they've got at this point. But this has been Emby versus Jellyfin. Remember, the whole focus of this video has been about these platforms on NAS, not in of themselves from a client side, but how they are to configure and share with other users from a NAS perspective. There will be a third part in this series where we'll be revisiting the subject of Emby versus Plex, something we covered around about 1.5 years, 2 years ago here on the channel. And things have moved forward a great deal since then, ever since Jellyfin now has become a great deal more established. So do stay tuned for that. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'm sorry it was a bit long, did repeat itself in places, but I think just the necessary points needed to be highlighted just that a little bit more. If you have enjoyed this video, and if you are looking to get hold of a NAS server or looking for support, not only is this article linked in the description along with links over to Protector Desura's own information there that we talked about earlier on, but on top of that, if you are going to shop at Amazon and this video has been helpful to you, very important those two things are true before you do the next bit, please use the link below in that article to take you to Amazon. If you do that, anything you buy while you're at Amazon will result in a kickback coming back to me and Eddie here at NAS Compares, the only people here that run this, and it won't cost you anything to do that, and it really helps us keep the lights on here and keep things moving forward. Alternatively, there is links to the free advice section over on NAS Compares, which you can use for me and Eddie to help you out choose the right setup for your needs with regards to media servers, as well as links to other resources that you can use to help you on your journey towards setting up your own media server. But other than that, thank you so much for watching. Have yourselves a fantastic week, and I'll see you on the next video.